Good morning, everyone. I call the Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship to order. And I want to thank our members for their cooperation and patience as we meet today to complete the committee's consideration of legislation we initiated last week, as well as an additional bill related to disaster assistance. Ranking Member Markey and I met yesterday and discussed our shared desire to continue moving bipartisan legislation whenever we can. We started that process last week when we advanced an important bipartisan effort that my friend Senator Rosen and I have worked on for years to expand access to child care. And today we will be considering another bipartisan bill, this one led by Senators Scott and Schiff, to increase transparency in SBA's disaster loan account. I appreciate Ranking Member Markey's open communication with me and look forward to our continued dialogue. If we are going to reform the SBA and ensure that our tax dollars are truly supporting small businesses in our states, which is my top priority as chair, we will have tough debates and different perspectives on how to best do that. I will not shy away from doing that hard work, even if it means we must take votes on issues where we disagree. In order to best serve our members as we work through that process, I will give you all as much information as possible about what you will be voting on and in what order so that we can have orderly and productive markups. So you will find in front of you today there is a listing of amendments that will be considered and the bills that will be considered. I commit to being transparent about what order we will vote on bills and how I will manage proceedings, and I've asked Ranking Member Markey to meet that transparency by communicating about which amendments the minority plans to offer and in what order. If the minority chooses to offer amendments after the amendment on bills they plan to oppose anyway, then as chair, I have the right to cut off consideration of amendments. I hope it won't come to that, and it is my sincere desire that we can continue to work together even when we disagree. With that, let's jump right into the business before us today. First of all, I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's meeting. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 2 weeks for any member wishing to insert a statement into the record or revise or extend their remarks. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent to postpone votes on any question of approving any measures or matter or adopting any amendment on which a roll call is requested. Without objection, so ordered. Today, the committee is meeting to consider and vote on 3 pieces of legislation and the committee's rules. I want to take a moment to highlight a few things about each bill we are considering today. First, we will consider S-298, the Returning SBA to Main Street Act, which relocates and reallocates the SBA's workforce to locations outside of the D.C. metro area, reduces telework, and redistributes SBA resources throughout America. I am proud to lead this bill along with my colleagues, Senators Blackburn and Scott of South Carolina. Next, S-300, the Disaster Loan Accountability and Reform Act, which aims to prevent an SBA disaster shortfall from occurring ever again by heightening accountability, transparency, and reporting measures at SBA. Last year, SBA's disaster loan account had a completely unacceptable 66-day shortfall, which prevented disaster victims across the country from receiving assistance when they needed it most. I want to thank Senator Budd for introducing this legislation, which I am proud to co-sponsor, along with our colleagues Senator Scott of South Carolina and Senator Tillis. I also want to thank Ranking Member Markey for working with Republicans to create a bipartisan compromise amendment. I am proud of our work to come together to ensure SBA is best positioned to aid disaster victims nationwide. Additionally, S-371, the SBA Disaster Transparency Act, complements S300 and aims to bring further transparency to SBA's disaster operations. I want to thank Senator Scott of South Carolina for introducing this legislation, along with our colleagues, Senators Budd, Blackburn, Scott of Florida, and Schiff. Lastly, we also have the committee's rules to approve and adopt. I urge support of all of these measures before us today, and I now recognize the ranking member for an opening statement.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair, very much, and thank you for holding this very important markup today. And I'm glad that, as opposed to last week, our members will be able to make their amendments, to offer and debate those amendments. And I think that's a much better process and one conducive to having a committee which does work on a bipartisan basis to produce important legislation for our country. But I'm deeply disappointed that the committee is breaking the longstanding bipartisan tradition of calling an equal number of private witnesses for committee hearings. Since 2001, save for one Congress, an equal number of witnesses has been afforded to the minority to ensure fair and constructive hearings, and that was through Chair Risch and Chair Rubio and Chair Cardin and Chair Shaheen. And so it's, from my perspective, very unfortunate that we're breaking with a tradition which I think really did work to help to build, again, a spirit of cooperation and bipartisanship on this committee. Because with an equal number of witnesses, it ensures that the committee hearings are fair and that they're most constructive. So the proposed rule change will limit opportunities for small business owners to discuss the challenges which they face. The Senate created this committee to help all small businesses compete with larger firms, regardless of living in a blue state or a red state. The committee has been an oasis of bipartisanship in the Senate, and I just caution my colleagues that we will find that years of goodwill can be done away with in a day, and we have to work to maintain this oasis of the Small Business Committee. And my hope is that all members will be committed to achieving that goal. And I hope that my Republican colleagues change course and return to the committee's bipartisan tradition of witnesses. And turning to today's legislative agenda, I thank Senator Ernst for removing Senator Budd's Disaster Loan Accountability and Reform Act from last week's markup. This allowed us to come together in a bipartisan agreement that retains benefits for disaster survivors as they rebuild their lives and helps ensure that we do not face another funding shortfall. And I appreciate the meetings with you, Madam Chair, so that we could work on the disaster relief bill in a way that can be presented to the committee today as a bipartisan product. And I'm also pleased that we will be marking up Senators Scott and Schiff's bill directing SBA to publish its reports on the disaster loan program on their website. And together, these two bills increase transparency and hold SBA accountable to the American public. And finally, we are considering a partisan bill that displaces SBA employees under the guise of improving customer service for small business owners. Democrats and Republicans alike agree that SBA must have a strong presence in local communities, meeting small businesses where they are. However, instead of advancing common sense proposals such as Senator Shaheen's proposal to increase field staff, we are considering a bill that tramples over legally binding union agreements and forces SBA to move an arbitrary number of employees, and this is without any evidence that it will help the agency more effectively serve small business owners. So we're also considering this bill in the aftermath of DOJ's unjustified and sudden firing of SBA probationary employees, including those in the disaster and field offices. The ramifications of this action, if permanent, will be felt by all small business owners. This is unacceptable, and it is a disservice to the American people, especially with the disasters which we see on our screens every single day. As a result, my colleagues and I have drafted several amendments that we intend to offer to improve this legislation, and I hope that we can have a productive discussion today and in time return the Senate Small Business Committee to that bastion of competent and civil debate that it has always been. So with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Sheen.
I have a question. I don't know if this is the appropriate time. First of all, let me thank you and Senator Markey for working together to find agreement on the two of the bills we will be addressing today. But I didn't understand when you were talking about how the meeting was going to run, what you meant about being able to not call up amendments even though they've been filed and being able to cut off debate.
We have a list of amendments that the minority has presented to us, and we have agreed that these are the ones that will be voted on between the minority and the majority. So as we move through these amendments, if a member decides they want to come up with additional amendments that haven't been agreed to by the minority and the majority, then we will move on. And to further clarify too, we have a listing of the amendments that was pointed out last time. We didn't know what exact amendments were going to be offered. So we are trying to be more effective and efficient in that the Democrats, the Republicans, we will have an agreed listing, and it should be at every member's place on the dais when we come to the meeting so that we can move through much quicker and everybody will know what we are voting on. Yes, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could, are we just talking about today's markup? Is that what you were referring to?
Today's markup, but then as we move forward as well, we will be able to work between the Democrats and Republicans.
I would assume that, we would continue, there's probably rules, right, for second degrees and timelines and deadlines for that. And then there are, on occasion, opportunities where members find magic right here in this committee room and offer something that then gets everybody to agreement. And you would include those, right? You would consider those. Listen, I'm all for, members in figuring out a way to work together. I've been on many committees where lots of amendments are filed, and if the minority and majority can agree, I just want to also preserve members' right to offer amendment. Oftentimes, our colleagues just want to be heard, and they will withdraw their amendment from a vote if they can just be heard. But this seems like progress, but your comment that you would reserve the right to cut off amendments, I don't know any committee that just, you can take a vote in committee and move forward, but I don't know by chair if you
Well, and thank you for that. And I do reserve that right, and we hope that we are never in that position to do that. We should have most everything worked out ahead of time. And believe me, if it's fruitful debate, I'm not going to cut off fruitful debate. Thank you. Okay, we will move to the next item of business. It's S-298, and that is the Returning SBA to Main Street Act. We had amendments filed to this bill, and those amendments agreed to. And we do have Senator Paul here now, and then we'll move to the Markey Amendment. So we'll start with number one, Paul Amendment number one. And Senator Paul, you are recognized for your amendment.
This amendment simply directs the small business administrator to only relocate employees if the location determines that doing so will reduce the federal government's costs.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Paul. All right. I support this amendment, which clarifies that the SBA will only move forward with plans required in this bill if it saves the taxpayers money. Is there any further debate on this amendment?
Madam Chair?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
You're
And
recognized.
the bill has been put before the committee, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, good, thank you. So I agree with Senator Paul that before this bill goes forward, there should be an evaluation of its costs to the federal government and its impact on the dedicated public servants who work there. But the bill includes arbitrary targets. For example, there is no analysis to justify why 30% of SBA headquarters staff should be moved out of DC. There is no direction as to what types of employees should be prioritized in relocation. There is no plan for how or where employees should be relocated. And the list goes on and on. However, given that President Trump illegally fired the Inspector General for the SBA, an analysis must be done by a third-party, nonpartisan entity, and we need an objective, data-driven analysis before considering overhauling an agency critical to small business success, which is why I encourage my colleagues to support the immediately forthcoming Markey Amendment number 3, which would mandate the Government Accountability Office to perform a cost-benefit analysis on this relocation plan, so that we have a detached, fair analysis of what the impacts are, rather than a decision that is just made arbitrarily within the agency. So with that, I urge a no vote by my colleagues on the Paul amendment.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, Senator Paul, you're recognized.
I think your amendment substitutes and replaces the whole bill, which I don't think is going to pass. But if you wanted to offer it just to add the report to the bill, that probably would pass, or has a chance of passing.
Thank you. Okay, additional comments? Yes, Senator Sheehan.
Well, I just wanted to clarify from Senator Paul, who does your amendment suggest carry out the report since the Inspector General was just fired?
Mine isn't a report. Mine just directs the small business administrator to affirm that it's going to save money. I was just referring to his amendment, which has a report, which is a separate amendment. His report replaces the bill. And like I said, I'm not against his report. I'd actually vote for his report added to the bill, but not in replacement of the bill. I just wanted to mention that in case he wanted to alter his amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the question is on the Paul Amendment number 1. All in favor, say aye. All those opposed, say nay.
No?
The ayes have it, and the
We have a
amendment is agreed to.
Could we have a recorded vote, Madam Chair?
Okay, the gentleman requests a roll call vote on the amendment. The clerk will call the roll. Aye by proxy.
Mr. Scott,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Young, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Budd, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Justice, Mr. Husted, Mr. Markey,
Votes no.
Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Booker,
No by proxy.
Mr. Coons,
No by proxy.
Ms. Hirono, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Hickenlooper, Mr. Schiff, Ms. Chair.
Aye. The clerk will report the vote.
On Paul Amendment 1 to S 298, the yeas are 10 and the nays are 9. The amendment is agreed to.
Okay, next we will move on to the Markey Amendment, and this is Markey number 1, or Markey 3, excuse me.
Markey number 3.
Markey number 3, you are recognized, Ranking Member.
Thank you,
Markey.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair, there are real concerns that must be addressed before this bill can be implemented. This includes evaluating the costs to the federal government, not just in terms of dollars, but also in its ability to retain and recruit employees. This bill is anti-union and anti-worker. In fact, the American Federation of Government Employees, which represents about half of the headquarters SBA employees, submitted a letter expressing concerns about this legislation, stating that this bill is harshly punitive towards employees. Democrats and Republicans alike understand that SBA needs to meet small business owners where they are. However, this bill is not the answer. If passed as prologue, we can predict what will happen. If this bill is enacted, when the Trump administration moved the Bureau of Land Management headquarters out of the District of Columbia in 2019, 87% of the DC-based employees did not move. The department struggled to fill those vacancies, and eventually it moved back to Washington, D.C. Congress should be strategic, not impulsive and rash. My amendment requires the Government Accountability Office to perform a cost-benefit analysis of this relocation plan and provide any recommendations on how to best implement any transfer. Because ultimately, without careful, data-driven consideration, taxpayers and small business owners will bear the burden of this plan. So let us first have all of the information before us before we make such a profound change in the structure of the SBA. I urge an aye vote by my colleagues.
Okay, thank you, Ranking Member Markey. I oppose this amendment, which removes key provisions of the bill and asks GAO for a report and recommendations rather than moving the ball forward. The underlying bill ensures SBA is effectively utilizing its personnel and guaranteeing small businesses in all parts of America are able to access SBA programs if they need them. Is there further debate? Seeing none, the question is on Markey Amendment number 3. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Nay.
Recorded vote, Madam Chair?
Yes, the gentleman requests a roll call vote on the amendment. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Risch?
No by proxy.
Dr. Paul? Mr. Scott?
No by proxy.
Mr. Young? Mr. Hawley? Mr. Budd? Mr. Curtis? Mr. Justice? Mr. Husted? Mr. Markey?
Votes aye.
Ms. Cantwell? Mrs. Shaheen? Mr. Booker?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Hirono? Ms. Rosen? Mr. Hickenlooper? Mr. Schiff? Ms. Chair.
No. The clerk will report the vote.
On Markey Amendment 3 in the nature of a substitute to S298, the yeas are 9 and the nays are 10. The amendment is not agreed to.
Okay. We will now proceed to Shaheen Amendment number 1. Senator Shaheen, you are recognized for your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have been concerned about the effort to consolidate staff into Washington for a very long time throughout the Biden administration. I'm sure, Madam Chair, you heard me raise concerns about why that was happening and the importance of having district offices that were adequately staffed. New Hampshire went through a recession in the early 90s when I was in the state senate there, and we had 5 of our 7 largest banks that failed. The only thing that kept business afloat in New Hampshire was the SBA and our SBA office, which was available to help businesses survive that recession. And so I have had a long-standing belief in the importance of our district offices and making sure they're adequately staffed. And so I agree with the concern that we do not want to have all of the staff in Washington. We want to make sure that our district offices have adequate staff. That's what this bill does. It recognizes the value of our district offices and it codifies that in this legislation. It also would address concerns about the firing of SBA employees who, while a letter has gone out reinstating them, our understanding is that another letter is going out today to fire them again, which in New Hampshire means we're going to have fewer employees than the office really needs to help our small businesses. So that's what this amendment would do. I hope that my colleagues will consider it and agree with me that we should ensure that our field offices are properly staffed.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Unfortunately, I must oppose this amendment given it strips the entirety of the underlying bill and requires a good cause provision before removal of any SBA employee. Though I support the intent to have an SBA office in every state and adequate staffing, the underlying bill would allow the administrator to maximize the staff SBA currently has by relocating a portion of employees to field offices. Is there any further debate? Okay, seeing none, the question is on. Yes, a roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Risch?
No by proxy.
Dr. Paul? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Young? Mr. Hawley? Mr. Budd? Mr. Curtis? Mr. Justice? Mr. Husted? Mr. Markey?
Aye.
Ms. Cantwell? Aye. Mrs. Shaheen? Aye. Mr. Booker?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Hirono? Ms. Rosen? Mr. Hickenlooper? Mr. Schiff? Ms. Chair.
No. The clerk will report the vote.
On Shaheen Amendment 1, in the nature of a substitute to S-298, the yeas are 9 and the nays are 10. The amendment is not agreed to.
Okay, thank you. We will now move to Markey Amendment Number 1. Ranking Member Markey, you are recognized for your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment prevents parents and caregivers from being forced to choose between their job and their family. Under the bill as written, nearly all SBA employees could be forced to relocate hundreds of thousands of miles away. And this bill provides no financial help or assistance for the move of those families by the employees. My amendment would protect all SBA employees from having their rights violated by this relocation. It would also keep all legal recourse options on the table, because without these protections, worker rights would be trampled, and relocation decisions could be made for retaliatory or political reasons without considering the harm to the families. So, Madam Chair, I ask that all members of the committee stand up for families and worker protections by voting to pass my amendment.
Thank you, Ranking Member Markey. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment as it expands exceptions far beyond what is reasonable and limits SBA's ability to truly put the right people in the right areas and get SBA resources to small businesses on main streets across America. Is there any further debate on this Markey amendment? Okay, seeing none, the question is on the amendment.
Can I have a roll call, Madam Chair?
The gentleman requests a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Risch?
No by proxy.
Dr. Paul? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Young? Mr. Hawley? Mr. Budd? Mr. Curtis? Mr. Justice? Mr. Husted? Mr. Markey?
Aye.
Ms. Cantwell?
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Shaheen? Mr. Booker?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Hirono? Ms. Rosen? Mr. Hickenlooper? Mr. Hickenlooper? Mr. Schiff?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Chair?
No. The clerk will report the vote.
On Markey Amendment 1 to S-298, the yeas are 9 and the nays are 10. The amendment is not agreed to.
Okay, the next amendment will be Ranking Member Markey's amendment, Markey Amendment Number 4, and you are recognized, Ranking Member.
And this is my final amendment to the bill. The bill we are considering is anti-worker, it's anti-union, it does nothing to protect American small business owners from DOJ's unauthorized access to their private data. Last week, it was reported that the unqualified and unvetted staff from DOJ accessed confidential data stored at SBA. So we have small businesses by the millions sending in all of their confidential information about their lives. These are just small people, and they're looking for help from the government. And to have this group of DOJ unqualified and unvetted staff having access to that confidential information is, of course, very concerning, and it should be if you were a small business person. One has to ask what guardrails are in place to protect the data of employees and the millions of small business owners and homeowners who have utilized SBA programs. So it's a little bit like letting the fox guard the hen house, and let me be clear, these foxes are not good foxes. They're unvetted. We don't know who they are at this point. There's no standard which has been set to allow these people to gain access to the most private information that a small businessman could have about their lives and the petition they're making to the government to give them just a little bit of a hand. And one of Musk's minions at SBA was fired from his previous employer for leaking proprietary information. That's somebody at SBA that must have sent in. He was fired for leaking proprietary information. In fact, a former FBI agent is quoted as saying that if he was doing the background investigation, he would not have cleared this Doge employee for the work which he is doing. We just can't allow for these unvetted Doge appointees to come into an agency which has the trust of millions of small businesses across the country. These records are the most intimate profile of that person's family, in fact, that they tried to use to get a loan from the SBA. And I just think it is wrong. So the amendment would prohibit these Doge staffers from accessing the American people's private data at SBA. And it will also protect SBA employees from retaliation for not following any unlawful Doge orders. So that's our very simple amendment. Until procedures are put in place to make sure that all this information remains confidential, this amendment says that these Doge employees should not have access, and I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Ranking Member Markey. I oppose this amendment as it prohibits certain federal employees outside of SBA from accessing SBA's internal systems. This is contradictory to the role certain agencies play in the executive branch, such as the Office of Management and Budget, and limits transparency and accountability. Is there further debate? Yes, you are recognized, Senator Shaheen.
Well, I have a question for Senator Markey or for the chair or whoever can answer it, and that is, what is the reason that DOJ has given for needing to access those records of small businesses that SBA controls?
I don't have that information in front of me.
I think obviously these Doge operatives are working under the cover of darkness. And as a result, we have no idea what the authorization is, what they're doing, and all we're trying to provide here is a prophylactic protection against just a breaking and entering into all of that private financial data of small businessmen and women by the millions across the country. And that's all we're really trying to do here. We don't know what the authorization is. We don't know what the standards are. But God help us if anyone was allowed to come into our private lives or anyone else's private life without having a legal justification for doing so.
And is there any requirement that they're not allowed to change those records if they access them?
Senator, what I have understood from the other agencies is that they are allowed read-only access.
But isn't it true that the Treasury Department admitted that they were, the people who access Treasury records did in fact make changes and had the access to
I
make those
don't
changes?
know that to be true.
I
and we
think that
would
was
need
part of a legal
We would need
lawsuit.
a brief on that. We don't have that information presented to the committee today.
Can the committee request a briefing from DOJ on what they're doing at SBA and why they need to access small business records?
We could request a briefing.
Would you
yes,
do
Senator
that?
Shaheen. I'll work with Senator Markey on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the question is on the amendment, Markey, amendment number 4. And those in favor of the amendment, aye.
All aye?
Those opposed to the amendment,
Can we have
say
a roll
no.
call? Roll call, please.
The gentleman requests a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Risch?
No by proxy.
Dr. Paul? Mr. Scott?
No.
Mr. Young? Mr. Hawley? Mr. Budd? Mr. Curtis? Mr. Justice? Mr. Husted? Mr. Markey?
Votes aye.
Ms. Cantwell?
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Shaheen? Mr. Booker?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Hirono? Ms. Rosen? Mr. Hickenlooper? Mr. Schiff? Ms. Chair?
No. Okay, the clerk will report the vote.
On Markey Amendment 4 to S298, the yeas are 9 and the nays are 10. The amendment is not agreed to.
Okay, pursuant to our earlier unanimous consent, further proceedings on the measure are postponed, and we will now move to our next item of consideration. And so we will move on to amendments to S-300, Disaster Loan Accountability and Reform Act. And though we had 2 amendments filed by the ranking member since that time, we have come to a bipartisan agreement. So I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute to S-300, and I ask unanimous consent that it be considered as read. Without objection, so ordered. Again, this is a bipartisan, complete substitute to S-300, and I urge all members to support this amendment. Is there further debate on this amendment?
Madam Chair.
Yes, ranking member, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased that we were successful in reaching a bipartisan agreement on Senator Budd's bill, and I appreciate working with the chair on this important legislation. And as this bill demonstrates, the Small Business Committee can be an oasis of compromise and bipartisanship when we work together. Through our negotiations, we were able to remove any provisions that would reduce benefits for disaster survivors. The bill, as amended, instead gives SBA the flexibility to conserve funding when the disaster accounts run low and ensures all disaster survivors can get the help which they need. And as amended, this bill increases transparency through additional reporting requirements so that Congress is better prepared to address a funding shortfall should it ever happen again. So we all hope and expect that that will not happen, but I agree with my Republican colleagues that we must be prepared, and I'm pleased, and all Democrats are pleased, to be able to work together on this important legislation to protect disaster survivors and ensure they receive the benefits which they deserve.
Thank you, ranking member. Yes, Senator Schiff, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you and Ranking Member Markey, Senator Budd. I want to thank you for working together with us on this bill. And Senator Budd, just want to express my condolence to your constituents after they endured so much in the storms that hit your state last year. As someone from a state who's also working through a painful disaster recovery, I know that we both want the federal government to be there for people when everything they have is destroyed in the wink of an eye. I share your alarm that SBA was forced to shut off disaster lending because it took so long to notify Congress about its funding needs in the past. This was a failure of communication that should have never happened. I'm pleased to join Senator Scott in introducing the SBA Disaster Transparency Act. Also support the transparency and accountability provisions in Senator Budd's bill, Disaster Loan Accountability and Reform Act. I'm happy to support the bill, and I'm glad that staff on both sides of the aisle were able to come to an agreement on perfecting the language to ensure transparency measures don't come at the cost of those relying on these programs for a lifeline in the wake of disasters. Transparency and timely notifications are critical in ensuring our disaster accounts are funded appropriately, and I agree it's unacceptable that the funding lapsed in the past because SBA failed to notify Congress in a timely manner. Changes must be made to prevent this from happening again. Congress has repeatedly shown that when given proper notice of SBA's balances, it provides funding in a bipartisan manner to help disaster survivors rebuild. After seeing so many tragic and increasingly expensive disasters strike states represented on our committee, we need to be moving SBA forward, enhancing its ability to help our communities after disaster, not moving disaster assistance in the opposite direction. So once again, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, grateful for your work on this bill. Senator Budd, thank you for your leadership on this. And I also want to acknowledge, as I may be out of the room when we take up the next bill, Senator Scott's leadership on the SBA Disaster Transparency Act, which I'm proud to co-lead with him. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Schiff, and again, appreciate the bipartisan work on this bill. So we will go ahead if there's no additional debate on the amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. And pursuant to our earlier unanimous consent, further proceedings on the measure are postponed, And we will now move to our next item of consideration. And this will be on S-371, the SBA Disaster Transparency Act. No amendments were pre-filed, and I move to favorably report S-371. Again, the bipartisan bill, and this is by Senator Scott of South Carolina, Senator Schiff, Budd, Blackburn, and Scott. All in favor? Ranking Member, did you have any remarks?
Thank you. Yeah, just like the, thank you, Madam Chair. Just like the Disaster Loan Accountability and Reform Act, this bill also aims to address the 2024 disaster funding shortfalls. This shortfall was avoidable. We must have increased transparency to prevent this from happening again, and Senator Schiff and Scott's bill is common sense legislation that requires SBA to publish its reporting on the disaster loan program on SBA's website. And I support this legislation, and I urge unanimous adoption of it.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I move to favorably report S-371. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and it is the ruling of the chair that S-371, with a quorum being present, is reported favorably by the committee. Okay, and next we will move on to committee rules, and we had one amendment filed to this measure, and that is the Markey Amendment Number 1 to the committee rules. And Senator Markey, you are recognized.
Thank you. And this is the last, but a fundamental piece of legislation that we have to consider. During last week's markup, members raised concerns about the partisan direction of the committee. And despite this, the chair would still like to proceed in breaking longstanding bipartisan committee rules. The proposed rules would limit my ability as ranking member to call an equal number of private witnesses for committee hearings. Our committee rules have served us well for almost the entirety of the 21st century, other than a single Congress a decade ago. Through, again, as I said earlier, through Chairman Rubio, through Chairman Risch, but all the way back to the beginning of the century, those were the rules under which we operated, with the exception of 2 years. And these 3 current members of the committee, Senator Risch and Senator Shaheen included, have run this committee in a bipartisan manner. The proposed rules would prevent real small business owners from providing their perspective just because of their political affiliation. In order to adequately and efficiently address the problems of small business owners, we must learn from all small businesses, not just a select few. And that is why I'm proposing an amendment to continue with the 118th Congress's rules. Having equal witnesses ensures that a variety of perspectives are heard and makes our legislative products very much stronger. So I urge the chair to adopt my amendment and continue the decades of long tradition of bipartisanship on this committee.
And thank you, Ranking Member Markey. I oppose this amendment as I believe the witness change is minor to conform with standing Senate rules. Though it would only provide for 1 witness for the minority, I would be willing to work with you to discuss the witness numbers for hearings, and I urge a no vote. Is there further debate? Okay, seeing none? Yes,
Madam Chair,
Senator Shaheen.
so are you suggesting that for hearings going forward, you're willing to entertain having an equal number of witnesses for the majority and the minority? So I guess I'm confused about what rule we're trying to comply with in terms of changing.
We are going back to the standing rules of the Senate, which allows the majority to have a greater number of witnesses for their committees. But I am willing to entertain discussion on the number of witnesses as we move forward, as it would be like discussions about field offices or other measures.
And is that because we're concerned that the hearings are lasting too long? I guess I'm confused about why the need for a change, since it seemed to be working so well.
I am just going back to the standing rules of the Senate.
Have you been directed to do that by
No,
leadership?
no, I have not been directed. This is something that I feel that is appropriate. We are in the majority. We'll go to the standing rules of the Senate, which allows additional Republican witnesses. But again, in the spirit of bipartisanship, I am happy to entertain a different number of witnesses. And it will be dependent upon the days. The length of time that we have to meet as a committee is extremely important. You can see that we have many members that come and go. So we will judge that according to other committees that are meeting on those days and be able to adjust the number of witnesses accordingly. But I am absolutely willing to work with our minority on that.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope that the chair will continue to do that. I think, as we've all said, and certainly I felt this way when you were ranking member and I was chair, that we tried to work in a bipartisan way that was in the interest of not just the committee, but of small businesses throughout the country. And I think continuing to operate in a way that recognizes small businesses don't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. They just need help when they need it, and that's the goal of this committee.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Yes, Senator Rosen.
Madam Chair, I want to associate myself with the ranking member and Senator Shaheen and express my disappointment in the change this committee. Small businesses, like Senator Shaheen said, I don't know if they're Democrat or Republican. What I do know is that 99% of businesses in Nevada are small businesses. And they have concerns, they have questions, they may have issues depending on the state or the region, whatever it is, and we just want to be able to have them come and hear their voices. I never ask a business whether they're Democrat or Republican. They just are trying to live out their passion, their dream, whatever it is. And Madam Chair, I believe that in the spirit of bipartisanship, you know this, and it's really been important in this committee is been such a good space for us in that way, and I would just hope we would maintain that tradition of this entire century, except for 2 years, to keep that relationship going. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Senator Rosen. Additional discussion? Okay, thank you, Ranking Member Markey. Again, I do oppose this. Is there further debate on this amendment? Okay, seeing none, the question is on the amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. No.
Get roll call, please.
We will do a roll call, yes. Thank you. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Risch?
No by proxy?
Dr. Paul?
No by proxy?
Mr. Scott?
No by proxy?
Mr. Young?
No by proxy?
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy?
Mr. Budd? Mr. Curtis?
No by proxy?
Mr. Justice? Mr. Husted?
No by proxy.
Mr. Markey?
Aye.
Ms. Cantwell?
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Shaheen? Mr. Booker?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Hirono?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Rosen? Mr. Hickenlooper? Mr. Schiff?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Chair?
No. The clerk will report the vote.
On Markey Amendment 1 to committee rules, the yeas are 9 and the nays are 10. The amendment is not agreed to.
Okay. Whoop, excuse us. We'll make sure we get the right language into the record. I move favorably to report the committee's rules. And all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and it is, all those opposed say nay.
No.
Okay. The ayes have it, and it is the ruling of the chair that the committee's rules, with a quorum being present, are reported favorably by the committee. Okay, the committee shall stand in recess subject to the call of the chair, and we will meet off the floor then to approve the measure. So thank you. We will stand in recess.